Meeting for Monday, July 16th, 2018 will please come to order, and the clerk will call the roll.
Calling the roll, Mr. Miller.
Here.
Mr. Jones. Mr. Jones is absent at the moment. Ms. Simon. Mr. Tuma. Mr. Tuma is absent at the moment. Mr. Gallagher.
Here.
Mr. Shrine.
Here.
Ms. Brown. Present. We have a quorum. Also like the record to reflect that Councilwoman Baker and Councilwoman Conwell are also in attendance.
Great, thank you very much. Has anybody signed in for public comment?
No, no one has signed in.
Thank you. Next item is the approval of minutes from the June 18th, 2018 meeting. Those minutes are in your packet. Is there a motion?
So move.
It's been moved and seconded to approve the minutes as presented for June 18th. Any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed say no. Motion's approved. And the minutes for June 18th are accepted as presented. Matters referred to committee. We have one item, a resolution for a contract. Please present it.
Resolution number 2018-0151, authorizing a state term contract with Wolpert, Inc. in the amount not to exceed $796,408 for digital oblique photography mapping in connection with the Ohio Statewide Imagery Program for the period 9/1/2018 to December 3rd, 2022.
Okay.
Good afternoon. Janelle Green on behalf of Department of IT and also Tom Fisher. This item was sourced in cooperation with the appraisal department. We would like to enter into an agreement with Wolpert, Inc. for digital oblique photography mapping in connection to the Ohio State Imagery Program. I just wanted to make a couple of corrections on the agenda. The contract period should be from September 1st, 2018 to December 31st of 2022. We'll finish the payments in August, but the maintenance runs to the end of that year. Also, the amount should be corrected to read $769,408 for the contract period, which is $192,352 per year. To go into more detail about the request, what it does, it allows the appraisal department to access software that would allow users to essentially see 360-degree views of residential or commercial buildings without having to physically go to each building. The oblique images will verify certain data characteristics from the office when the property is difficult or impossible to get the data collection from it while in the field. These services were competitively bid by the state of Ohio in 2014 by the Department of Administrative Services. An RFQ and RFP were utilized to find the vendor. To date, 61 other Ohio counties utilize these services as well as the federal government, and is considered the industry standard. We previously contracted with Eagle View Pictometry for similar services in 2015 for $1.3 million. That expires in August, and this would pick up after that contract expires. The appraisal department did comb through the contract and eliminated unneeded portions of it, such as change detection, building footprints, and ortho imagery products. Again, I have Thomas Fisher here, who is the GIS administrator, to talk through some of the services that this software provides.
So I've put together a couple of slides just for people's understanding, more complete understanding of what ortho imagery is. So this first image is something that most people understand if they use Google Maps or Bing Maps. This is what's considered a typical ortho imagery or ortho image, which is nadir, which means the aircraft flies and it takes a picture down. Those are stitched together geographically, and it comes up with a product that looks similar to this. When we refer to oblique imagery, if you look on the left, there is an aircraft which actually flies, and instead of taking that what is considered the center portion of the image. And I can't use the, that is the nadir. It actually takes pictures in all four directions at the same time, so forward, aft, and to the left and right of the aircraft. The image to the right is the pattern in which they would actually fly over the county. It actually zigzags back and forth on clear days. To capture what is considered oblique, or a 45-degree angle of structures, this is a typical residential structure captured in oblique imagery, so that you can see the front of the building, the rear of the building looking north, and the east and west sides of the building. This is used by the appraisers, again, to measure height, the width of the building, any sort of outbuildings or structures that are attached during the appraisal process. And this is what would be considered a typical commercial oblique image. This, again, is also used by the appraisers to make determinations of the structure composition, length, width, as well as our emergency services groups typically use these to understand, in case of an active shooter, what the ingress-egress of a building would look like. For something such as a fire or other emergencies, also ingress-egress, as well as the windows and other composition of the building that may be needed to strategically attack any sort of event that may be occurring inside a commercial structure such as this. So that in a nutshell is the technical aspect of oblique imagery program. You're available for questions.
Okay. Did I hear you correctly that it's $769,408, not $796,000?
That is correct.
Okay. And
I did not mention, though, this is coming from the REA funds and not general fund.
right. In the resolution itself, the end date is correct. It says 12/31/2022, but the 796,408 incorrect number is also in the resolution itself.
Oh, the agenda said 12/3/2022. So I just
Right,
wanted to make
I
sure.
saw, yeah,
wanted to make sure
that's
it's
in the agenda, but it's not in the resolution itself.
Okay.
So, but the resolution itself does need to be corrected for the dollar amount.
Correct.
And I would also bring to everybody's attention the third whereas clause. It says, whereas this project, if funded, and I presume it should be, is funded by the Real Estate Assessment Fund.
Yes.
So I would like to ask if someone would make a motion to correct the dollar amount to $769,408 in each of the three places it occurs in the resolution itself, and also change IF to IS in the third whereas clause. Is there,
So move to make all those changes as noted.
is there a second? Any discussion? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Okay, so the resolution is amended, and I would ask my colleagues if they have any questions. Okay, go ahead. Okay,
Go.
Councilman Shaw.
These images that, almost like a three-dimensional aspect to it, do they belong to the county, or are we only using them?
Yes, sir. There is a deliverable that it comes on an external hard drive that, in fact, the past 4 years program that we just completed, we actually have all of the images for the past 4 years. And
The images, can use them whatever way we want to?
that is correct, sir.
Okay. And how about the citizen themselves, whose house that might be in the image? Can they download that image and use it for their own real estate purposes?
So the contract states that that we allow people to view that on our web page, on our web mapping. They can download the image from there. It is a lesser resolution than than we actually have in our possession. Contract states and is the proprietary nature of the image itself. We did have a public records request for the imagery. which then I put them in touch with Eagle View, and they were able to actually obtain the imagery that way. So we don't actually fill those public records requests. They have to go through Eagle View at no cost to the county.
Okay, but the image that they're seeing is a higher resolution. They just can't download the higher resolution. Is that what you're saying?
That is correct. They can download one, but it's a degraded resolution.
No, my question is what they're seeing. Are they seeing the higher resolution?
They're seeing the high resolution.
Okay,
yes.
so it's just a matter of they can capture it on their own somehow
Correct.
through technology. Then
Yes.
they,
In fact, one of the images that I showed, there's typically about 27 photographs that actually comprise that at different zoom ratios. So yes, they can, actually capturing each one of them individually can be sort of a challenge to an individual. So that's why we put them in touch with Eagle View as well, because that extraction of that data is pretty easy on their end. So, yeah.
very good. Thank you.
Ms. Conwell.
Through the chair to Mr. Fisher, are we getting savings from the last contract? You said 1.3 million, and this one is 769, due to the connection with the state?
Actually, there were some elimination of things that the appraisal department found that we no longer needed, so they eliminated some of those. That's why it's not like an extension. That's why it's a brand new contract.
And what were the eliminations?
The eliminations were change detection, building footprints, and some of the ortho imagery products.
And what would change detection be?
Change detection is where, from one year to the next, if there's construction or deconstruction within the county, then they actually identify those properties for us.
Okay. And any other uses other than the appraisal department where we could use this?
Again, first responders typically use it, again, to see ingress, egress of a structure, most typically for, a SWAT team or fire or something along those lines. But there have been instances where active shooter, they've actually been used to evaluate the property or the building or structure to understand ingress and egress or access to the building.
Has there been any thought in terms of if residents can utilize and download this from the website, that there could possibly be a fee or charge for that?
I don't know. I have not explored that option. It's definitely something that I'd be willing to engage in a conversation with Eagle View on. Again, I think some of the restrictions are contractual with Eagle View in the proprietary nature of this data.
Thank you.
So,
I have a few questions. First of all, is passage on August 7th on 3 readings acceptable, or do you need it passed at next week's council meeting?
so the first flight would occur this fall. I believe the contract begin date is September 1st. I believe as long as we meet that deadline, they can get us into the queue. The flights typically begin in October. Because of the challenging fall weather, they typically do a flight and then go back and capture other areas with leaf off. Again, this imagery is typically best suited for collection in the spring before trees receive their leaves. Our appraisal department likes to have it in the fall because it's as close to the lean date at the beginning of the year. So there's not much change. They've captured all the summer building season. But it presents an issue with leaf. And so the closer we get towards the end of the season, leaves actually drop off the trees and you're able to see underneath the canopy. So I think that's why the September 1st deadline or first contractual date is there, but they typically begin in October. So.
And do we find enough stuff from the pictures to help us on the appraisal that we make back the money that we put into this contract?
For that, Dan Harbaugh is in attendance, and he is our chief appraiser. I would maybe ask that he answer that question for you.
Hi, Dan Harbaugh on behalf of the appraisal department. So the answer would be no to that. That's not the purpose of the software. we're not looking for missed improvements. We do find them, but we also find the opposite. When improvements have been removed that we weren't notified of, that we then remove from the record.
So if it's not to help us with the tax duplicate, what's the reason for spending $769,000 for these pictures?
Just about every appraisal department in the state of Ohio, every county utilizes some kind of oblique imagery. It gives us a historical snapshot of the parcel as well. It allows us to estimate percentages of completion for new structures, so we can see as close to the lien date as possible, January 1st. We're often out doing the new construction cycle in August, so we have to retroactively try to determine how far along that property was completed as of the first of the year. It allows us to do market area delineations, so when we're trying to group neighborhoods and common housing stock, we can utilize this software. Percentage of completion I mentioned, and a historical snapshot. So we have these images going back many, many, many years, and we are able to track them that way. Tom mentioned it allows us to measure distance, area calculations, height, elevations, and topography. So it is a daily tool for everyone on my staff.
And why is change detection no longer needed?
I'm not sure. I don't know that we ever really utilized it before, and I think that was the main reason we removed it from the contract. A lot of independent companies provide that software as well. We didn't find it worthwhile.
Other questions, Vice President Jones, and also noting that Vice President Jones and Council President Brady are now in attendance.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You mentioned when a law enforcement needs imagery, do they receive their imagery from Eagle or from yourself or from the county's database?
So as part of the contract, we actually have access to what's called Connect, Pictometry Connect, which is a online multi-tenant application. It means EagleView actually stores all of these images on their servers, and with a username and password, anybody can get in to actually view these images. In fact, if you look at, see if I can go backwards here, show you this real quick. What you see here is that Connect Explore website. So that actually this shows the ortho image, but as you zoom in, it actually brings up the oblique image. You can see up in the upper left-hand corner is the cardinal direction, so you can actually navigate around the structure within that. So, and this also allows for query based on parcel number ownership, and it's augmented with the county data that we have from the fiscal office. So,
When you create the imagery for the entire county, how long does that usually take? And do you do this annually for us over the course of the contract?
yes, this contract would be for an annual flight for 4 years, and it can typically take. Again, it's all dependent on the weather. So when they like to fly is no clouds with full sun and no precipitation or any standing snow on the ground. So the windows are the window of capture is very small, but when they do have a good window, they can get a plane up in the air and capture, I believe it's a quarter of the county within a day. So.
Okay, thank you.
Councilman Tran.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So we had change detection before, and we dropped it. And the reason we dropped it is because we didn't use it.
That is a good question. So I just became director of the appraisal department in December, so I don't know how long we had it previously and at what use it was put.
And so when people are putting on decks and additions to their houses,
We can measure those physically from the imagery.
yeah, but you have to go out and physically go out and measure, but change detection.
No,
wouldn't-
no, we don't have to be notified of the change. The notification comes from the building department via a building permit. So we have a deck permit. We can look on the imagery and measure the deck simply from the image.
Okay, so it's assuming that all permits were filed and all information
Exactly, yes.
was recorded, but change detection would have noticed it even if the deck was not properly done.
Correct.
But this will, we waived that because we don't have that in play.
We have.
Okay, and sounds like completion percentage going through to January does not just, I mean, our chairman asked a great question. We're doing this only because the other 7 counties are doing it?
No, because we utilize it as an appraisal tool every day. Every appraiser is utilizing the pictometry in their course of work. So our main function in the appraisal department is not the 6-year reappraisals and the triennial updates. It's the annual maintenance where we're addressing 20 to 30,000 building permits and all the lot splits and consolidations. So it also assists with that process. So when the plats are filed to consolidate or split up a subdivision, it allows us to visually see all the parcels, their topography, and what value we may assign to them.
So will this replace the appraiser actually getting in the car and going out and seeing it?
Slowly but surely, that certainly is the path.
Is that the intent then?
No, that's not the intent. You often have to get into the field to see the quality of the improvements. Sometimes those are not detected through the imagery. See the craftsmanship and quality.
I know that this 11-member panel, the very first thing we were faced with on that, was it the first week, was the appraisals and how many they were stacked up with, I think 10 to 11,000 appraisers. And so now you're going to have a tool of which the person's going to sit there at a computer basically and do this ultimately. It seems only fair that the taxpayer who's paying for this ought to get the same exact tool, not just a watered down version of it. If that's,
You mean the degraded
Yeah.
resolution? I don't disagree with you.
okay, that just seems to me to be the appropriate thing. I mean, because ultimately the taxpayer is paying for every penny of this out there. Thank you.
Councilwoman Baker.
Thank you, Chair. And I would agree with Councilman Schron when it comes to the ability to see the difference between the ortho imagery and the oblique and seeing the detail that's there, that it should, I would think, not down the road, but almost immediately assist our appraisal department to be able to maybe pick and choose where they may have to visit and those that they will not. And that should be directly a savings for that effort.
Absolutely. No, and I agree. It's allowed us to maintain a smaller staff. We are more efficient as a result. The differences between the oblique and the ortho imagery is simply a straight down versus the 45-degree angle. So yes, each appraiser spends the majority of the morning going through each permit to determine which one will need a field review and which ones can be resolved using the pictometry.
And that's what this oblique does for us
Yes.
when passed.
Yes.
So why, when the question was asked, why wouldn't this save us dollars and not just, in a down the road answer, but almost immediately, if we don't have this tool now and we're initiating it and have that ability to see and pick and choose where we go, why wouldn't that be a savings
Well, that
right
is
away?
a savings. I think the initial question was framed as, are we finding things to pick up that we are adding to the tax rolls? Additional garage or a shed or something like that, or a deck in addition that we didn't have on our records. I couldn't attribute a dollar amount to those, but what you are discussing specifically is creating better efficiencies and processes.
So we should see a savings
Should
after a
see a
year of having this under our belt. We
We've had
should-
it under our belt for several years.
Okay, thank you.
We'll go with Ms. Simon and then Vice President Jones.
Thank you. So is Board of Revision, did those boards have access to this as
They
well?
do. The Board of Revision has access to the software as well.
So they use this as
They
part of
do
their
every day.
hearings?
Yep, they do
So
as part
it's-
of the hearings.
So it's more than just your
It
appraisal
is, and I
department?
should have brought that up.
No, that's
Yeah,
okay. I
okay.
figured they could
Same
use
funding
this.
source, but yes.
Thanks.
Vice President Jones.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And again, I just want to add my voice to my colleagues as well. If that high-grade image is available to law enforcement when they're active shooters, it is there. It makes perfect sense. There are efficiencies that can be created or achieved when we have that high grade. I don't see why it couldn't be part of the contractual negotiations to be included. Is there any reason why we could not receive the high-grade images?
Maybe some clarification. So we do have the ability to display the high-resolution imagery on our portal. So the public actually does have access to view the high-grade imagery, just as our appraisal department does, Board of Revisions. It's when a copy is requested for their own personal use, is it a degraded quality at that point? But if you're actually viewing that imagery on our web services, it's the exact same quality, high resolution that anybody within the county would actually have the ability to see. So,
Okay.
Ms. Conwell?
Now, through the chair to Mr. Fisher, are these imageries also of the abandoned properties? And is there a connection with the county land bank?
I'm not aware of a connection with the county land bank, but it is all properties within the
Okay,
county.
so you take pictures of the abandoned properties
Yes,
as
well, the flight pattern is about, I believe it's a mile overlap into adjacent counties and out into the lake. But it's all land owned or in the jurisdictional boundary of the county, so that it captures anything and everything within the county.
And when I mentioned the county land bank, just wondering if this imagery could help them in any way
Yeah.
with the abandoned properties.
It's possible.
since
So
we're-
I actually started this position in November, and in engaging Eagle View through this process, I have requested that they do a training program for anybody in the county that would be interested in understanding this imagery and how it could be applicable to their workflows, as well as giving them access to the portal, that Connect View portal that I showed you previously, giving them access to that and being able to do whatever helps them as far as their workflow is concerned.
So right now, they don't.
We have
Individual
not.
cities don't have it.
Cities actually use our website. In fact, I was actually out in Olmsted Township meeting with the administrator out there, and she had indicated that she uses the oblique imagery quite a bit on our GIS portal. So,
Okay, thank you.
Is there, Council Vice President Jones?
And this may have already been explained before I walked in, so I apologize, but were there any other bidders to the contract?
No, this was something that the state of Ohio did an RFQ and an RFP for back in 2014. This particular services are considered the industry standard, and so utilizing these services from this company has been used statewide. 61 other counties utilize their services as well. So we utilize the agreement with the state of Ohio.
So this company has provided this services for how long? How many years?
We contracted with them in 2015. So the current contract expires in August of 2018.
Okay.
So they've been around, I think, since 2006, I think 2006.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Okay, do we have a motion to refer the resolution to the full council?
So moved.
Is there a second? It's been moved to favorably refer Resolution 2018-0151 as amended to the full council for second reading. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed say no. Ayes have it, and the resolution is referred to the council.
Thank you.
Okay.
thank you.
Okay. Okay. Item number 6, discussion, quarterly review of the Enterprise Resource Planning System implementation. We'll bring forth the administration to make that presentation. Mr. Chief.
Good afternoon, everyone. This ERP project is a top priority for the executive as well as for me as Chief of Staff. We have provided written responses to the council questions that were raised at the last session where you received Zig Bergen's report and we're going to deal today with our quarterly report, and are pleased to have the opportunity to present it to you. The agenda is set forth on the attached. After a brief introduction, you're going to hear from Public Works, get a planning overview, have an opportunity to hear about progress in human resources and fiscal, receive a budget forecast, and finally, a benefits modeling update. The goals of the project are set forth on this slide. We feel we've already achieved some significant progress in Public Works, and the goal is to implement the ERP in a way that will transform our Public Works operations, our human resources operations, our fiscal operations, create a unified software system for the county, and at the same time significantly increase productivity and efficiency in our operations. The project management structure is set forth on this slide. We've been in touch with Zig and consulted with him on this. This is not precisely what he recommended, but it follows many of the recommendations. We are focusing very heavily on the project management team. We call that the Project Management Office. That is the group of people who are running the project. Michael Young is the head of the project management team. And it consists, as you can see, of representation from fiscal and HR, which are the two areas that are the focus of the project at this point, as well as a representative from Infor and members from the IT department. There have been delays in the project. They've been caused by a number of factors. One is a change in the leadership. Another is a decision to convert the Infor model, Infor being our primary software contractor, from an accrual method to a cash system. And the other, simply the need to adopt to new ways of doing business, which are never easy. But we are making very good progress. Today, you'll hear from Jack Ryan, who's recently been retained as a project management consultant. Jack has an extremely impressive background in ERP project management, very lengthy resume, which I believe was distributed to members of council some weeks ago. And Jack is focusing heavily on fiscal at this point, but he has also taken responsibility for re-baselining the entire project so that we have an opportunity through that to establish some new dates for completion, and he will explain that to you a little later in our presentation. Dennis Kennedy is not able to be here today because of an illness of a family member, but Dennis has advised us that he is feeling very good about the work that's being done in fiscal right now and about the success of the project. At this point, it's my pleasure to call on Mike Chambers, who's going to talk about the progress being made in Public Works. Mike?
Good afternoon. Mike Chambers again. I don't think anybody is more excited about what's going on here in Public Works or with this ERP implementation. I know before you, we stood one time with stacks of paper to represent it, a day or a week. I'm happy to say that, in September, we will now be, all of our waves will be launched and will be paperless. The final wave will be launched September, but it's also going to be our most challenging. It's going to be our facility division. The good news is we've learned from every wave so far. We've self-trained where we had some stallmates and some issues and where we felt that our supervisors weren't quite getting it. We've established additional training, and we feel very, very confident that although it'll be our most challenging, I think we'll be able to handle that just like we have these other waves. Here's where we're at so far. You can see, you have it in front of you as well. Sanitary, the dispatch and print shop was our first. They went off very well. GIS, the supervisors, CTV, all the rest of our departments. Once again, these are all the departments that we've rolled out so far, and these are all the ones that we've learned. And although we've learned, they weren't major problems. They're minor issues. We realized that we trained the supervisors, gave them all the training, but once they started using the system, they had a lot more questions. So now we're going back and retraining and re-answering those questions. Fleet is our next one coming up. We are very fortunate. We have two very techie managers in fleet, and we feel that that is going to be extremely well. We don't foresee any issues with the fleet. Once again, facilities, it's going to be a very challenging one, but we're prepared for it. As you can see, the gray is what's been completed, and the green is what we have yet to do. So as a recap here, 6 of the 8 waves are completed. Once again, fleet, the 23rd. We expect that next week to go off. And once again, we feel very confident in our managers out there. 100% of the work orders are being done on the system. We are no longer handing out paper. Those stacks are no longer there. I do recall telling you many times that we don't have live data, and people are asking questions, why don't we have more timely information? All of that information had to be keyed into separate systems. It had to be reconciled. It was months before I could see that information. We now have that information once it's closed. When those work orders are closed, even when they're not closed, we have that information in our system at our fingertips. We can run reports. In addition to that, we got over 40 tablets right now in use. We're going to bring out about another 40 when we do the facility division here in the next couple of months. We're excited. I tell you, a long time ago, I couldn't imagine how a big $120 million operation like Public Works was running on paper, but for many years we managed, and now we're excited about the future. So.
Thank you very much. Yes, Ms. Brown.
Mike, Mr. Chambers, just a quick question. You mentioned there's some challenges in the facilities department. Can you touch on those a little bit and tell us what they may be, what we might expect?
Sure, they're good challenges. Once again, you got many buildings, many different trades. You got a lot of different supervisors. We got projects going on. For example, the sanitary print shop just had orders coming in and taking care of them. Sanitary had their certain orders, but the facilities is a big area. So those are going to be challenges. But once again, everything we've learned, we're going to pass on. I did reach out to 2 supervisors today, and I asked them, is anyone being left behind? I know there was a couple that felt they couldn't do it at the beginning, but with the additional training, they're all in it right now, and they're all moving forward. So I know one of the concerns I think we had originally that some of the employees wouldn't be able to get on, and they have gotten on. So it's been very positive. But facilities is just a very big area.
Big category. And then last, you kind of touched on it, of the successes and efficiencies, but can you give us a more succinct or concrete example of what that paperwork, so it sounds like you're moving to live, so as opposed to months of paperwork, are you day to day or minute to minute? Like what's the reduction or efficiency?
Sure. We do have some numbers in the back that we'll eventually get to on some of the forecasts that we have, but I spoke to our print shop manager this morning, and he said, Mike, it's very thorough. It's requiring a lot more time up front. He said, but on the backside, he spent days going through all his orders, typing them into spreadsheets. He says he doesn't do that anymore. He just hits the button, and the report comes out. So that just alone, and I've done some forecasts that we'll get to maybe in the back pages that show some of the financial savings that we're predicting. Efficiencies, I don't want to say savings, it's more efficiency. We're going to be doing more with the same amount of people.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for sharing this. That's all I have.
Ms. Conwell, and then Sean.
Through the chair to Mr. Chambers, retention, or any of the paperwork that now is no longer needed, do we have to retain in any way for law or purposes or anything like that?
We've always retained it according to our current record retention policy. I believe it's 3 to 5 years after audit. But once again, we will continue to retain that until we no longer need it. But in addition, obviously, we have safeguards in place with the new system for the electronic data.
Okay, thank you.
Councilman Sean.
Mr. Chairman, are we using iPads? Is that what we're doing? You're using tablets and type devices?
We're using a combination of our desktop units, and in the field, in sanitary, we have tablets out in those fields right now.
Okay, and is there a lot of redundancy to a lot of the works as far as the jobs? This job is would repeat in some form to a high degree from one job to the next, or is everything custom? Every job?
There's a lot custom, but we do have what we call work areas, defined work that we have to, clean the city over a 3-year period, and we have, it's called scheduled work, but a lot of it gets called off as those calls come in. Those crews are being reassigned. The work order is hitting to their tablets, and they're being, changed course. But when they're done with that, they go back to the scheduled work that they have, and that's mainly on the sanitary side. The other areas, it's all live stuff.
Okay, there's no repetitiveness to how you dig the hole and how you put the cage in for support and all those kind of things, I would think.
Well, I will tell you this, that whatever you're doing out there, we have those categories pretty much predefined. If you're
That's
digging, if you're
my
doing
point.
this, I'm sorry, yeah, I misunderstood. Those are already in there. So what our men and women in the field are doing is they have dropped down, and they're hitting them, and it's there. And we're gonna have consistent data, because in the past, you and I might call two things, we just misunderstood there. Two different things. We're going to have one consistent format going forward. So yes, those are all predefined. Check, check, check. It's very simple in the field on the tablet.
Are we using barcode data collection at this point in time, or is that inevitable? We're going to get there.
We're not using it right now, but everything that we're putting in has a part code that we're, when we order supplies or we put supplies to a project or a task, we have to put that part number, especially now with print shop. Everything he orders, every type of paper, every pound, it has a unique, barcode, not barcode, but product code, and that has to be put in. That'll be very valuable in the future when we want to sit down and sit there and analyze exactly what we're buying. I mean, I mentioned this to you before. I know who I'm buying from and I know how much. I don't know exactly what I'm buying because we don't record all that information, but we will going forward.
The next phase will just be you'll put a button on that bar. Within that, whatever that code, you'll just touch the button, it'll go out to your vendor.
That would be, yeah.
It's already being done, so that would be exciting to, again, I'm thrilled that you're moving along on this. Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you very much. Yes.
Thank you. I'm just curious on the fleet. That's a 2-month process, and it's going to be ending or beginning Monday, the 23rd. So what is involved in that?
The fleet, once again, I feel great on that one. I mean, like all of the other processes we've done so far, we've taken what we've been doing on paper and we brought it into the tablets and on the computer.
So fleet are the vehicles?
Correct.
So what are you doing with the vehicles?
So any kind of repair job, a brake job, all of that stuff will be pushed out to the mechanics, and they'll have their vehicle is out in the parking lot, bring it in, it needs a brake job, it needs this. All that information is typed in. One nice thing about fleet, I know I'm going off here a little bit, but
Let's not go off very far.
All right,
We got
sorry.
bigger fish to fry than
you're
this.
right. We just have files of paperwork. These now we can actually take right on a button and say, hey, this is how much we spent on this vehicle.
Good. Thanks for the
Nice,
explanation.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thanks, Mike. Okay, what I'd like to review, Mike Young, Department of IT, is the project planning overview and the approach that we're taking, what the current status is, and the objectives for July. Later on, when Jack Ryan comes up and does a presentation on fiscal, some of the things I'm talking about here, you'll see in a lot more detail. Okay? So in any kind of a project, this included, you need to identify what's going to get done, when it's going to get done, and who's doing the work. The PMs associated with this initiative over the last couple of months have been getting down to the ground level with the lines of business and completing that last piece and lining up all those resources and the who's that are going to be detailing with the when and the what. That's really what we would refer to as a rebaselining. So what they've done is they took the original project plan that N4 had laid out, met with the lines of business, looked at what the resources were, and readjusted all the dates. So it's something that we think that we're fairly confident that we're going to be achieving. And everything was focused on the appropriate level of detail that is in the project plans. You'll see that one of the documents that Jack will go over is the team approach, that where a particular assignment is assigned to that team, and the owner of that team is responsible for getting that done, and they'll leverage all the resources that are part of that team in order to complete that task. Current status, HR has been refined. The dates are still consistent with open enrollment, and those dates are going to be met. Fiscal plans have been revised. Jack will go over those in specific details with you later on in the presentation. You'll see there were some significant changes on those, but he's done an outstanding job, as Dennis has said, in order to get everything lined up properly so that we have a good project schedule going forward. We met with a few council members earlier this month or last week, kind of going over some of that. We're going to have all of that rebaselining done by the end of this month. And I'll open the floor for questions, then we'll turn it over to Douglas to go over the human resources schedule.
Councilman Gallagher.
Define for me rebaselining.
So there was a March date that was in the project plan. So the PMs.
March of 2019.
Any date, but you use that one as an example. So they would go through and actually relook at all the work that's getting done. They would partner up with N4. They would partner up with the lines of business and the resources from the business and their availability to work on the project. So then they would rebaseline all the dates based on all of those categories to make sure that that new date is a date that we're going to be able to achieve. So that's what they mean by rebaselining.
What about the original dates?
After we've done a more detailed analysis, they were wrong.
Okay, so anybody that had come to that podium before this council and told this council at that podium that this would be on time and on budget sometime last year would be what?
Incorrect. From a timing perspective, when we get to the budget, we'll talk about that more, but we're still on budget.
And I don't know if this is for you or not, but Mr. Berzins recommended that one person be the project manager. And the answer was, we feel that the responsibility, accountability, and leadership required will be provided through the ERP PMO team that we have created, which includes representatives from fiscal, HR, IT, and the executive. This PMO is driving the project and meets regularly. That's the team that failed us.
I would disagree with that. There's been probably 30% turnover in the members of that group since.
I noticed Mr. Carroll's no longer in that group.
No, he's not, but a lot of, Cindy Nappy's not there anymore. Scott isn't there any longer. I got brought on board, Jim got brought on board
This
in
was
March.
after the Scott debacle. And Mr. Kennedy still is on that team.
Yes.
My concern was then, my concern is now, going forward, that they're, short of hearing from the gentleman that was just hired, there's no one on this team that's done a project like this. Yet you're the project team management. I don't expect you to answer that because I don't get it. You were given a recommendation by somebody that evidently knows what he's doing, and you give us an answer that I can't figure out. And the thing that I'm left with is sitting here with what was an incorrect statement about on time and on budget. Now, I'll be asking that again, and I'll be getting the same answer. And absolutely no heads will roll when we spend more money and more time because this PMO team doesn't have the expertise, short of the new guy, on what to do. on how to run a project like this.
I would disagree with that.
You can disagree all you want. I'm just telling you what I've got. I asked the question and I was not told the truth. And I didn't ask for a shot in the dark, throw a dart. There's a stake your reputations on this. Is this on time, on budget? Yes. I couldn't believe they answered it. But I thought, I'll let it go. Here we are. One's not there, one's still there. And I still think we've got some problems there. I hope we don't, but we do. So I'll keep watching. I'll keep asking.
Mr. Chair.
Councilman Schwan, and who did I see? Okay, Ms. Simon, okay.
Just a little follow-up on Mr. Gallagher's question. Slide number 4 is the Manning chart. I'll describe it. It's the org chart.
Okay.
And I don't know, whenever I think of an org chart, I think of dotted lines as supporting the top line, which ultimately goes to one person. And the other day, I asked, you knew I'd probably be asking this question. And I said, if push comes to shove and something has to be decided, there's a discussion within the project management team, and ultimately somebody has to take the chair and say, I'm deciding, this is it, and this is where it's going to go. And as I recall, your hand went up.
Yeah, I get to
Or went up,
I get to
whether
break the tie.
voluntarily, involuntarily, whatever the reaction was, whether it was a Pavlovian reaction or just whatever caused the hand to go up. I would have expected your name to be at the very top of this Manning chart, ultimately, and not have, as has been alluded to, a series of dotted lines, and there's straight lines going above it. I'm kind of a simplistic guy. Dotted lines mean that they are nothing but chatter, sometimes in an organization. They are not the ones who are making the decision, and you're the one who in that meeting last week said you are the man. So why isn't the man right there to answer that question? And I don't care whether you don't have experience. The first time somebody did a surgery, they never had experience either. But would I love to have people with more experience? Great, but we don't. You're the man. I'd love to see that chart redone to reflect what our council had suggested, that there is one person ultimately at the top of a chart.
Okay.
If that's not going to be, tell us that's the way it's going. That it's intended. I mean, I find it interesting that the project management office, which is the team that we were suggested, it's the only one that was in a different color, is actually the third block down from the top as opposed to the top block. If that's really the way that structure is.
We did change the chart to put Mr. Young as the PMO head.
I just see
You're
that.
saying you want to put him at the very
I'm just,
top over the.
yeah, I mean, the only one that was in a different color block when it appeared on our, yeah, when it appeared on our color screen,
Okay.
the only one that looked like it was the head of this whole thing, and I thought that's the answer you got also, that it's a team that's in charge, not an individual.
Yeah, we have put Mr. Young in charge as the head of the team. And so, I mean, we could move his
It just,
designation up, but it is on the chart.
when it popped up on the screen,
Yeah.
I hate to say it, but both of us kind of chuckled and thought, wow, that's clarity? I'm sorry, but it did not exude clarity to me. I don't know about anybody else, but I'm just giving you my point of view.
All right.
Thank
We'll
you.
make the change.
It's real. I mean, don't, yeah, if
It
you
was
are the
easy
man.
just to take the existing chart that was there and they just inserted it. We'll just move it around.
Thank you.
Okay, I think that is progress to have an identified leadership in place. Ms. Simon?
Thank you. I just want to circle back to Chief of Staff Earl Likens' comment that part of the delay is caused by the change from accrual to cash. And I've never been given a satisfactory answer why that even occurred to begin with when we're not on an accrual basis. We've always been cash. And why the company and whoever was in charge of the ERP would even allow that to go forward. And how, knowing that history, how will that be remedied going forward with the most basic concept of how the county operates and shifting the system?
I'll have to defer that to Dennis when he gets back and have him respond to that for it, because it was him and Scott that were going back and forth determining whether or not to go cash or accrual.
No, I think Dennis Kennedy was very clear about what the issue was. So are you saying that Scott perhaps mismanaged how this operation went forward?
That's prior to me being involved in the project, so I can't really speak to what their conversations were.
I can assure you that we heard from Dennis Kennedy that this was a problem and that Scott continued on with not taking control.
I understand that, but you're asking me a question about a conversation I wasn't privy to.
Well, how are we going to stop this from happening again? Something so most basic. You're in charge, at least with regard to the person at the top. How will you make sure that something like this won't happen again?
Any decision from the creation of the PMO team forward has to come in front of the PMO team before it's allowed to move forward.
Okay. So we have your assurance, going back to my colleague Gallagher, that the buck will stop with this team and with you at the fore of that.
It's going to be my responsibility.
Okay.
Councilman Tron.
To follow up on Ms. Simons, there was no doubt, I asked the question specifically in this room, you can go back and check the record, and was asked of Mr. Kennedy when was he aware, and it was not, he was not even brought into the process on the accrual versus the cash concept until way after this project had even got launched. He was somewhat chagrined that you wouldn't have the chief financial officer at the table for that question. So, and that was all being driven by Infor, as we were told, because that's the way they normally do accrual, because that's what businesses do. We don't, cash basis, we don't, most businesses are on accrual. And so they've pushed that down, and we're shocked when we didn't acquiesce immediately. And if you ask Mr. Kennedy, he will tell you he was shocked that he wasn't asked that at the very beginning of this process. That's my recollection of what was said when he was here.
Mr. Chair, if I can follow up.
The
Unless someone
Council
else has
President Brady is next, then Simon.
Well, this is a quick question. The team, going forward, how often are you scheduled to meet?
The PMO meets once a week, and the steering committee meets once a week, or once every other week.
Once every other week, so the team, okay. Thank you.
Ms. Simon.
That's correct, Mr. Schron. Councilman Schron is correct with that Mr. Kennedy was left out, and why you would bring his name up in terms of me talking to him about this. You're not trying to pass the buck on to Dennis Kennedy, are you?
No, he was
About what
part
occurred?
of the conversation. I wasn't.
He was not part of the conversation. I don't know why you said that.
Whatever decision that came forward between accrual or cash Dennis was in this conversation at some point, whether it was at the end or not.
Well, when
I
it was
wasn't
too
there.
late, so
That's
I
fine.
just,
Again, I'm going to repeat myself. I wasn't there. So
Okay.
I can't speak to that.
so maybe that would have been the appropriate answer when I
I
asked you
did
that.
say that.
No, after you brought in Mr. Kennedy into this and Scott. So just for clarity purposes, he wasn't at the table, and now he is. That's your answer. He's part of this team, so hopefully we'll move forward more comprehensively. It just sounds to me like you're trying to call him out as being responsible for this delay, and that's not
I
actually
wouldn't
what
read
happened.
anything into it. Like I said,
what?
all I'm saying is I wasn't there, he was. All right, so if you want to ask me a question of anything since March, since I've been here, I can answer that.
Okay, but he wasn't there. You keep saying that he was there. He was not at the table. So the accurate historical context you're not describing. Either if you weren't there, you don't know the answer. You keep stating he was there. He wasn't.
Okay.
Not okay. I mean, this is your colleague who serves on the PMO team, and what I'm hearing from you is just a lackadaisical response to bringing him in as this responsible person
No,
for
I
this
keep
delay.
telling you that I don't know. And
That's
I've been
what-
pretty consistent about that. I wasn't there.
Well, you say you don't know, and then you say he was there.
Okay, well, let me just say this in response to the questions that have been raised. I think Councilman Schron is correct that Infor started, as I understand it, and I wasn't here, Mr. Young wasn't here, with an accrual system. That's what they generally use. When Dennis found out about it, he felt that the appropriate system was a cash system. I feel personally more comfortable with a cash system. That's what I was used to in public service as a mayor, so I think that probably was the wise decision. But the fact is that it did cause a delay in the project because the Infor model, for whatever reason, not chosen by Mr. Young or by me, but by the people who preceded us, was an accrual system. And so that had to be turned around, and I just mentioned that as one of the reasons for the delay. So hopefully that'll help to clarify.
Thank you. It's not a question of whether it's even appropriate. I guess at some level, if we want to shift the whole basis upon which we've been operating, but we've always been cash. It wasn't even a question that this company and the oversight from ERP team or Scott didn't even notice that this was going on.
Correct. And none of us know why somebody decided on an accrual system when in fact, the county's always operated with
Right.
cash. Yeah.
So I guess the message is that moving forward, we're going to have a responsible team to make sure that something as most basic way to operate doesn't happen again with this kind of error. I mean, this costs the taxpayers money. It cost everybody money because somebody wasn't paying attention.
It did cause a delay, and but now it's been resolved, and we're very much moving forward. Thank you.
Councilman Tron.
The Chief of Staff, Mr. Chief of Staff, if you could, if the logical thing is that there was an error and it was of the core of this itself, and the cause is going to be a delay of time and ultimately money, it seems as though the responsible request is for Infor to pick up a big portion of the tab of this, because there's no question that that is a fundamental thing that any consultant should be asking. At the that's square one of any project of this nature. And so if this has caused us to go down a whole different path on the freeway, and we now need to correct and come back, it just seems like it's a logical place when you guys are getting down to the negotiations, being asked for time and for money, that I hope you're going to use this as a tool.
Well, we can certainly use it as an argument. I would say this, that I wasn't there at the time. To my knowledge, there wasn't any secret about the fact that Infor was bringing in an accrual system. So it may have been that whoever was making the decision for the county thought that system would work and that that was the best system. Now, Mr. Kennedy doesn't agree with it. I don't personally agree with it, that an accrual system made sense for the county, but I'm coming in way after the fact.
And most public entities are using cash basis. I mean,
We can certainly explore that issue and see if there is.
it's not like cash is a new concept for public entities.
No.
And these folks are coming in, they're the third largest ERP company in the world.
Right.
So we're not bringing in a bunch of rookies into this. They surely have done public accounting and public ERP packages before.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. I believe, and we have to go back and find out for sure, but I believe that whoever made the decision at the county side fully understood that this was an accrual system and felt that that system would work. That's my understanding.
Councilman Gallagher.
And isn't this a fantastic example of having one person at the top? I wanted that at the beginning, well before you. This administration determined to go with this mishmash of spider web, whatever you want to call it. To go to Mr. Lyken, wouldn't we know right now who that person was that made that determination on accrual or cash if we had a project manager at the top? The answer is yes. When I asked the questions about on time and on budget, if we had a project manager standing at that podium, I know if that person lied to me or didn't lie to me, that person would have a job or not have a job, depending on where we're at today, if we had one, if we had just one person. But we still have the spider web. So we have examples of how it doesn't work from the beginning to right now. I'm not saying it can't work, but I have examples of how it doesn't work. And you're going to insist on going forward with the spider web approach as opposed to a project manager at the top making all these calls. And if that person were responsible for all these decisions. This would either be right or be wrong, and we know where we're at. You're asking us to go forward with what doesn't work. And that's been my entire point. And I hate to say I've been right from the beginning, because I didn't want to be right from the beginning. One person needs to run this. This is backwards. It doesn't work. It doesn't work. There's not one thing you can point to this date that has worked. You bring Public Works up here because it's the low-hanging fruit. We know it. That's the easiest thing, and that's working. Everything else has been pushed back because even back then, I have no idea what I'm talking about, but I was right. It's not going to be on time or on budget. And if we had one person doing it, maybe we would be there.
Ms. Baker.
Well, let me just respond briefly to
If I
that.
can, before you do, I believe that in the discussions we had earlier, we asked that exact question, and we felt that it was needed, and Mr. Young stepped up and said, I will be the project manager, and I will be the person where the buck stops, and I will be the person who is responsible for any question that should come up, whether it has to do with fiscal, HR, or any part of this project. So I believe that we have accomplished that. Tell me if, and I had a peace of mind because I asked for that, and that's what was decided, and we seemed pretty good about it, but that was in a more of a casual conversation. Is that in fact the case, that Mr. Young is the project manager, is labeled that, buck stops with him, whatever questions we ask go to him, and he makes those determinations about cash or accrual or anything, timelines or delays or anything that comes up, he's the guy we go to. Is that accurate?
That's absolutely correct.
Okay.
You're
That's
absolutely correct.
Excuse me, Mr. Lycan, can you speak into the microphone, please?
Mr. And Mr. Chief, do you have any additional comment?
No, I mean, we've heard the council loudly and clearly. I do think, oh, did you turn it on?
Yeah, it's on there.
We've heard the council loudly and clearly. We have talked with Mr. Berzins about it, and we did designate Mr. Young to be in charge of the project. So you're absolutely correct in your impression.
Okay, please proceed with the presentation.
Douglas, you're up.
Good afternoon. Douglas Dykes with Human Resources here at the county. My presentation won't be long because we're just getting started in a lot of the areas of HR. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the schedule, about what our critical milestones are, and really we have two out the box, and then answer any questions you may have. So here's our schedule. As you can see that we are still on target to implement the modules that's under HR on time. The critical ones that we want really to focus on today is the core HR, which is GHR, and also benefits because of open enrollment. Now, core HR is the area in which all of the core information of the employee is in the system. So the employee's address, their job title, their salaries. And then benefits, of course, is all the information, whether it's their dependents, what benefit package they currently have, that's that information. And that's our critical milestone that we really, really want to focus on. Our objective is to do open enrollment in N4. And in order to do that, we have to be locked and loaded by the end of September. Locked and loaded means that we've done all the testing, we've done all the possibilities of breaking the system, whatever we've put in there to make sure that it works. so we can have open enrollment beginning the midweek of October, which will go to the beginning of November. And again, I already talked a little bit about the core HR system and what is in that area. So we did some refining of our plans to make sure that we're going to hit this critical date when it comes to open enrollment. And let me just take a little time to talk about what happens now with open enrollment and why this is so critical. I have a staff in benefits of probably around 6 or 7 people. And every year, so I've been here for 2 years, every year when it comes to open enrollment, we spend probably 4 months after January 1st to level set the data that's in the system so it can export to the vendors correctly. So you may say, well, wait a minute, you put data in the system. Yes, we did. And a lot of times that data wouldn't come out correctly. So we're sending multiple files to the vendor. And sometimes, and even this past year for last year's open enrollment, we had data that just wasn't correct. So what went over to the vendor, sometimes employees had more dependents than they actually had. Sometimes dependents weren't showing up. And so that's why it's critical. You know, Michael Chambers talked about, you know, the importance of this system to public works. This system is really, really important to human resources too. So we're defining that work. We're reevaluating our resource planning. So just in benefits alone, we've shifted 2 individuals, 2 of our more senior individuals, to work on the implementation of the ERP solely. So once we get to that point, they will be doing that. They won't be doing their current job that they're doing right now. We have shifted those responsibilities to others in our department. And then the tasks that are repetitive, the clerical tasks, we're actually bringing in temporary agency people to take care of that. So what's on the horizon? We definitely are doing the testing. So we're converting a lot of the data that's in our system. And again, remember, I said that the export of that data in the past, we've had a lot of trouble with it. But we're converting that data into our system, the Infor system. But then we're going in, we're checking that data. We're making sure it's right. And these individuals will check the data and correct it by looking at paper files and make sure it's right by September, the end of September, and then validating whatever goes into the system at that point. So how are we preparing HR and employees? I want to focus on the preparation for HR first, because I think the preparation for HR is very, 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 very important, because the HR group will be doing most of the work. Let me say why I'm saying that. Employees already input their benefits information into a system. So it already goes into my HR. And so what my staff did last year is we structured the My HR platform, the pages, to be more aggressive and to be more in line with what we thought the Infor system would look like. And so employees shouldn't see too much of a difference when it comes from when they inputted in My HR last year to when they will input into Infor this year. So the training of employees, there will be some training there, but we won't need to train employees in depth like we would if this was just a brand new system and they never inputted information before. But the training will happen with HR. Our objective is to make sure that we have key HR people in all of our sites, or at all of our sites. We're going to have computer labs where those employees can walk in there and get help, individual help or collective help, when it comes to inputting their benefits information. So that's where we are right now. I think that the next time we have an update, we'll have a lot more information of how it's going. has the information transferred into the Infor system 100%? How valid is that information? Again, we're in the process of doing that right now. I'll open it up to any questions.
I have a couple questions. I looked at the July 11th report from the third-party assistant that the county hired, and it listed a good number of items in HR that had not been completed yet. And my question is are there any elements for the HR implementation that you need for the open enrollment that are currently behind schedule, or is everything on schedule?
For open enrollment, as I understand, everything is on schedule at this time. Where we are behind a little bit is on workforce management, and that's our time and attendance. So we seem to be a little bit behind on that. We were waiting for the consultant to be allowed into the United States. The consultant is actually from Toronto. But from what I understand, the benefits portion in open enrollment and core HR, we're on target.
And the workforce piece, when is the target implementation date?
The end of this year. So we want January 1st of next year, we want everyone to be using the Infor platform when it's recording their time and attendance.
And to Mike Young, are you in agreement that everything for the everything needed for the open enrollment implementation is currently on schedule?
Yes.
Okay. Other questions, Councilman Schron?
Yes, Mr. Director, how many plans and sub-plans do we have in the healthcare, dental, life insurance, all those areas that we have right now that we're carrying on, if you look at the full scope of what we've got?
I don't have that number for you, but there's a number.
Give me a range. I mean, gosh, I would have thought that would, it's a high
say
priority item for.
I would probably say there's probably 15 to 20.
Okay, and you have 4 major carrying products out there in addition to the subcategory? I assume
Yeah, about, yes.
Okay, and what are they?
So we have medical mutual. We have, well, actually, there's a little bit more than 4. We have Metro Health. There's a ASME plan, a union plan, and there are the benefits, the supplementals, the dental, and the eye care. And there are a couple of eye cares, and I think there's.
Because I personally, my own business, this is one of the most highest important items that I look at to make sure, because it's so critical to the employees, is the healthcare package and the benefits and the programs. Have there been any changes to any of these plans since last year to this year? Different benefits added, deductibles, changes, co-insurances, dollar amounts, hospital visits, all these kind of things?
There were some changes, yes.
And have those all been installed right now into the computer systems? All the changes, because I assume we're on a calendar year basis for.
Are you asking, have they all been installed in the current system, or?
For the program that's going to go forward, that everybody's going to have to hit that target, and they're going to have to all be trained as to what those benefits, not just how to go into the system, but gee whiz, my family is now going to have a $25 deductible versus a $10 deductible they had last year, whatever those changes were. Historically, those 15 plans will all have moving changes every single year to some degree.
Well, they won't have moving changes for next year. So we made the modifications between last year and this year. We don't intend to make any more modifications, if I'm understanding your question, so far as deductibles, higher costs for a particular plan. We don't intend to make any changes going from 18 to 19.
The carrier's absorbing any cost increases and not passing those along to us, of which we in turn pass those along to any of the participants?
So if you're asking, and again, I want to make sure I understand your question. If you're asking, are the deductibles going to be higher, the percentage of employee costs going to be higher?
Yes.
Then yes, because I think you're asking two different questions. Okay, so the plan design will not change.
Okay, plan design not
That's
gonna
what you were talking about at first, because you said deductibles,
Yeah,
and you
yeah.
said this and that. That's a plan design.
It is a
We are
plan
not
design.
We are not going to change the plan design going from 18 to 19. Now, because the vendor will charge us more money, employees pay a percentage of that. So if they pay 10% and it's going to go up, then of course, that's going to change in the system, but the plan designs will not change.
Okay, well, I guess we look at it differently. We look at the cost first, and then we structure the plan design to make sure we are least impactful on the employee. But you're telling me we're
not-
going to change, leave the plan design, we're just going to charge it. So they're going to have to make a decision some point along the way, which plan they want, and they're going to have to come up to speed. And if they were in Plan A, they're going to be in Plan B. They might choose to go to Plan B. All this is going to be trained and up to speed and ready to go in the eyes of the customer when they come on board.
Yes.
And when is that training going to take place?
We're looking at the end of September, beginning of October.
So they're going to know all their cost increases as the individual. And they're going to know all their optional choices as far as.
They will know their cost increase again. And I just want to be clear. I want everyone to be clear. Plan design and cost increases, two different things in public. Okay? In private, a lot of times, what happens is that they look at the cost increase and then they begin to adjust the plan design.
Sure.
We don't do that here. Okay? We're going to keep the plan designs the same, and whatever cost increase will be passed on to the employer and the employee. So if they paid $25, let's just say, for tests last year, and it increased by a certain percentage, then they'll pay that higher percentage. But our plan design will not change. And they will know their cost increase by the end of September, because we will know the cost increase.
And the whole purpose for open enrollment is to allow them to switch between any one of those different 15 plans that you just discussed, and the only way they're going to know that is to be able to study that. And we're going to be doing many things all simultaneously.
Yes.
Last year, we didn't do all those things simultaneously. We didn't introduce the system. We didn't change their costs and things like that. I just want to make sure that we're giving the proper time and energy to this subject matter, and don't assume that it's all going to hit the targets out there. This is the most critical thing we do, I believe, in the entire ERP, is how we treat our employees. This is vendors. They can wait. As long as you don't. The vendors, they won't like that, but employees are the ones we can't screw up.
Yeah, and I hear what you're saying, and we are going to provide our employees with the information as quickly as we can. I am hoping that we can provide our employees with any increase in costs by mid-September. We're trying to work with our Oswald vendor right now to do that. So even before they have access to the system, they should have the information on cost increase to the plan.
Right.
That's what we are attempting to do. We did that last year. We're going to try to do it again this year. That's what our target is.
Okay, give us the date also at some point along. We'll give it to our staff as to when we're going to have that piece of information, because that unlike the ERP is a separate piece of information that's every bit as critical to the employee to making their decisions.
You got it.
Thanks.
Okay, time to move on to fiscal.
Good afternoon. I'm Jack Ryan. I'm the project manager for the financial area for fiscal and procurement and budget, which are included all in that project plan. Do we have?
Could you state your first name again, please?
Jack.
Jack.
Ryan. I'm sorry. Okay.
Great name.
We're up on screen here. Okay. I want to first deal with the project schedule and talk about four things, at least on this chart here. This has to do with the rebaselining of the project schedule for fiscal and how that's coordinated with other areas. I suppose the very first thing here would be the identification here of the relationship between payroll, general ledger, and the budget areas, okay? And payroll is scheduled to go live, based on this chart, on 12/21. GL goes live the first of the year, shortly thereafter, really almost in parallel with that. I'll explain that in just a moment. And the first implementation of budgeting, which relies on general ledger information, occurs, about 3 months after that on 3/1. 2 months after that on 3/1. So the relationship between those is kind of important. In this implementation, when payroll is implemented, it feeds transactions into the general ledger automatically. It's configured that way by Infor. And so there's an opportunity here to bring up either a significant portion or all of general ledger by the end of the year. We're still looking at exactly how much of general ledger we want to bring up, but the bare minimum will be that it'll have all the payroll transactions contained in that system. The information in general ledger is used by budget to do in the DEPM module in Infor to do the forecasting and planning. So once we bring up general ledger and allow that to stabilize and make sure that we're operating correctly, then we can begin to configure the budgeting module to do the kind of forecasting that group needs to do. So that's why these things, although you might not logically think of them together, that's why they're grouped together on the plan. So that's, any questions on that? That's the link between those two
Ms.
those two
Conwell.
systems.
I just want to be clear, Mr. Ryan, so you said we'll have bare minimum in the GL, but what isn't? I see the ones that are listed, but what isn't?
Well, in terms of what goes into general ledger?
Yeah.
Yes, ma'am. That's the bare minimum would be all of the payroll transactions would flow into general ledger, okay? We are looking at the option, and I would put it as an option here that Dennis and I are still working through, of bringing forth the legacy general ledger information, and at least even before we convert those other legacy systems like payables and receivables and cash and those things, we're looking at the option of bringing those transactions in as well, which might give us the opportunity to have a full general ledger from which we could actually do all the reporting on. We're looking at that very hard.
And who's determining who? To me, that makes sense to have all that historical information.
It would be great if we could do that. We want to make sure, A, that we have the resources to do that, B, that it's going to meet accounting standards, and we properly determine the book of record.
So you're saying we don't have it wasn't put in the general scope then?
I didn't say we didn't have the resources. I just want to make sure that we have, when we schedule resources, that we don't schedule more than we can actually get done for the fiscal group. So we're looking at it, but I think there's a good possibility here. That's where we are with that.
And who makes that determination? Will that be you or Mr.?
That's Dennis's call. I'll make recommendations.
Okay. And your recommendations at this point would be what?
My recommendation at this point is that we study it really hard. We're gonna make that determination here within the next couple of weeks. Okay.
Okay. Thank
All right.
you.
So
that's
on the,
yes, sir.
on the second line of the chart, what happens on 12/21, what happens on 1/1, and what happens on 3/1?
Okay, so on 12/21, that's when payroll goes live. Okay, on 1/1, since that's the break, and payroll goes live on 12/21 just because that's the first pay of the year that actually accrues into 2019. Okay, so then general ledger would be going live effective 1/1 for all the transactions. So the payroll transactions that got generated for 2019 would go into already be in general ledger, and then anything else that we decide, as I mentioned, to bring into general ledger at that time would go live on 1/1. Okay, once that's stable and we have that part of the financial system operating correctly, at that point in time, we allow a couple of months, then we can start configuring the budget module, DEPM module, to do budgeting and forecasting. Okay, we'd almost bring that up as a pilot. You know, you've got to get it configured, get it ready. A lot of work that has to be, pre-work that has to be done. so that it can be used for the next biennium forecasting and budgeting. Okay? So that's the first line to deal with. The next one, I think, would be just to mention. Oh, I'm sorry.
Council, hold on a minute, please.
Actually, just
Councilman Tron.
It's the second line only because you've already referred to it, though. You've worked on ERP packages and transitions before, many times, I'm sure.
Yes, sir.
How often do you see the general ledger not come over as a, I mean, that's what is telling you how you're running your business. How often do you see it come over as a skinnied version of it?
You would normally do it that way. That's why we're looking at.
You normally bring it over completely or in a skinnied version?
Well, normally you bring it over completely by doing what I just described. You
Right.
either, and that's why we're just looking at what it takes to get that done. I'm being a little cautious here in making that prediction because we have to build an interface from, it's part of the conversion program, actually. We're not building something brand new that wasn't in scope. But you take the conversion program that was used to bring everything over from the famous system, the current legacy system, and you bring over what you need in terms of transactions into the general ledger, combined with the payroll transactions that are already there. Now you have a complete ledger. The accounting question at play there is, if you make the decision to do that, then the proper accounting treatment of the now legacy system, because you may want to look at that, and this is, I'm not going to make the accounting decision, it's okay, the accountants will do that, but then that old system, the legacy system, starts to look more like a subsidiary ledger, if you will, feeding your primary ledger, which would be in GL. We're just finishing that part of the design process right now to make sure that can happen, okay? We haven't quite got through the discussion, but that's what I'm looking at recommending at this point.
But from day one, we were always planning on bringing over payables. We were always planning on bringing over cash. We were always
Yes.
planning on bringing over all of those.
All of it's coming
All those
over.
business legacies have to come over in order to run our business of the
Yes,
county.
sir. So it's a matter of timing. So let's go to the top line on the chart right now. Okay, so the top line on the chart has a rebaselining for all of the other accounting modules. Okay, they're all coming over. It's a matter of timing. Okay, so on the top line, what we're showing here, the green arrow represents the fact that the rebaselining discussion we're having today. Okay, on 7/16, the core, all those core financial systems that you just mentioned, accounts payables, receivables, cash, all that other stuff. Okay, we're looking at a 4/1 go live date. So the question is, what do you do with general ledger in the meantime? If payroll's coming up first, then that's what calls into question, how do we handle the rest of GL for this 4-month period of time, okay? And if we can bring all of the legacy general ledger information into GL and treat that as a package and make that conversion complete, that's work that we won't have to do on 4/1. It spreads the load from a resource standpoint, gives us a clean cutover with a lot of the GL stuff. It gives us, and there's no reason to wait until 4/1 if we can make those things happen. That's why we're looking at the timing that way. That make sense? Okay, all right. So that's the top line. The blue line is blue because you may recall from Douglas's presentation that all of the HR implementations are in blue, and workforce management has to be tested in parallel with and be implemented in parallel with payroll. So it's on this chart just to represent the fact that we're running those pieces of the project in parallel, and they're closely coordinated and they're tied together, intimately tied together. One feeds the other, and they have to be tested together. They have to be run through the same test cycle. Okay, so that's why the blue line is on the chart that way. So up to this point, so we've covered everything in terms of rebaselining the schedule and the new dates, with the exception of contract management and expense management, and rather so we can keep the team focused on these core applications. The best thing to do would have been to push those out to the dates that I've shown here. So we want to, and it allows time for the core financial systems, which that after the 4/1 date, we allow at least 30 days for that to settle down. Then we begin that final implementation of contract management and strategic sourcing and expense management. Okay, so that's why the schedule's sequenced the way it is.
So we have a a delay of at least 4 months.
Yes, sir.
What's the cost implications of that?
Well, as Mr. Young mentioned, the schedule and this information is in front of Infor. They have to respond to that in terms of cost implications, so I'm going to defer that question to him. I'm not involved in that level of costing here. I know we're waiting for that response to come back from Infor. They have been provided, obviously, with all the details of the schedule that we're talking about that underlie or support this. Okay?
Is the impact smaller because there's only 2 modules that are going out that far, and that most of it, in fact, will be live by 4/1?
Well, it's certainly the fact that most of the not all the projects being delayed till 8/1 requires obviously a smaller team on their part when we get out to that point in the calendar. So it'll be a smaller impact than if you had the entire project delayed instead of just these group of modules.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, sir. Others?
Please proceed.
Okay. Okay. What do we got there? Are we locked up? Oh. There we go. Thank you. Okay. So part of dealing with schedule delays, dealing with, is driven by making sure that we have the right methodology in place, the right approach in place to do what we need to do. So I want to talk about that for a minute. Then I want to talk about the specifics of the schedule just a little bit. So best practices based on not only my experience, but the experience of many others that have implemented ERP, I think are important here. My thought here is first of all on testing. As I looked at the schedule when I got here, it appeared not only did we not have enough time to get to some of the dates that were on the schedule when I got here, there were just not enough testing cycles in the plan to be able, for me to feel comfortable as a project manager that we were adequately testing the system to meet the requirements of the county. So part of what and we'll talk about the details of that in a minute, but part of what I did was added some additional testing and the time to do that and the time to correct from testing and correct any defects that might occur. And so, not all that facetiously, we need to test often, early, and as many times you can't do it as many times as you can. You can't really test too much in a system like this before you go live, especially a major financial system for the whole county. So that's one of the things you'll see. The other thing is making sure from not just an audit standpoint, but from a functionality standpoint, that the original requirements that the county contracted for, there's a so-called requirements traceability matrix. That's a fancy term for, we had a matrix of requirements that were embedded in the contract that we asked Infor to respond to originally. And it's a fairly lengthy list that covers all the functional areas. What we need to be able to do is in our tracking and our reporting, internally within the team and externally, whoever we need to report to, whether it's you or anybody else in the team, we got to be very transparent about being able to trace an original requirement for this is an activity we're doing now and testing now, right down to I'm going to run this scenario in accounts payable to pay an invoice, and it's this 5 scripts that cover that, and that traces back to line 70 in the requirements traceability matrix. And I think that's very important. So some of these questions about, well, are we going to get the functionality we contracted for? If we you get what you inspect, okay? So if we inspect it that way and we trace it that way and we hold Infor accountable that way and ourselves accountable that way, then we'll get what we want, okay? That's the concept here. And all of that kind of reporting and tracing is going to be in a visible place on a SharePoint site. I don't know if anybody know what that is, but it's just it's like a web page that the whole team will be able to look at and have dashboards and details. Okay. Okay. Yes, sir.
Councilman Tron.
Do you have responsibility for looking at that tracing that you just alluded to?
Yes, not only looking at it, but we've got the team that's putting together the details of how that sort of database of all those different things I just mentioned are going to hook together. and
But
be
you
traceable.
personally, are you,
I'm personally looking at that, and
Okay, so-
personally looking at that data.
so you personally will look at the contract, the commitment, and that linkage all the way through to make sure that
Yes, sir.
that go, no-go, or that dip switch was flicked in the right direction that
Right,
we
and
talked
we've got a
about?
lot of, I'm not looking at it, I'm looking at every line. We've got people working on their individual areas to tie
Right.
it together, but I'm personally overseeing that, yes.
Okay, so you would personally be able to go back and identify who made the original request for cash versus accrual?
Going back to that, I wasn't here for that discussion.
No, I
so-
understand you weren't here for the discussion,
so
but
I
there will
think-
be
I
some
think-
place in that ledger, some place that has to be recorded. I know how these programs go.
Yeah.
There's not a line that gets checked off without somebody's initials next to that line when it got approved.
Okay, so we can look at the RTM, the requirements traceability matrix, and see if that line exists on there.
Thank you.
Okay. And I
would
can't
appreciate
stand
if you
here and
could go
tell you
back and
whether it
look.
does or doesn't right now. I didn't look at that.
Thank you.
Okay. But to the council's point earlier, though, doing this kind of traceability will prevent any kind of confusion going forward, I think.
No doubt, this is the critical path you're doing right now. This is so important to make sure we have a body and a name and an activity all tracing back to whoever made the go, no-go on every one of those points. Thank you.
Yes, sir. Okay. So the next area is sort of resource planning. And I would call your attention to, it just didn't display right to put it up on screen, but you've all got a copy of this sheet that kind of looks like this, hopefully. Okay. Just wanted to point out a couple of things here. Basically, the project plan for the financial area is resourced to the team level. Okay, so every single task on that plan is identified with one of these teams that you'll see on that sheet here, and a team lead is responsible for that team. So what this does is this is in the same sense that we talked about accountability at the program level. This is accountability at the project level for what's going on in financials. And there's a name associated with every functional area and every module here, and that person is responsible for not only oversighting the team of people in their area for the project, but also helping us ensure that the solution for any one of these areas, I'll just pick whether it's accounts payable or GL or payroll or DEPM, that there's a person responsible for making sure that we're looking at that solution, that we've covered everything, that the defects that we've identified are properly retested, that kind of thing. So full suite of responsibility by team leads, and I think that's very important. Yes,
Just one observation, the elements that I've seen will say something like a particular employee is going to work on X project for 23 days from this date to that date. But what it doesn't say is how many hours of their total time is going to be required, and it's not clear that that same person isn't responsible for 6 other different things, so that when you add up all the time, it might be more time than they have available. And it's not clear to me that's yet been totally sorted out. Is that correct?
So in this plan, in the financial plan, okay, and here's how we're managing that. So I've got a team responsible for an area, okay, with a team lead, and that team, let's say that team has, I don't know, 10 people on it, just to pick a number here that's easy to work with. For each task, we sit down with a team lead and we go through that task and we say, what percentage of your team, you've got 10 people, it may only take 2 of them to do this task, so I'm going to allocate 20% of the hours for your team to that particular task. You are responsible for which 2 people need to do that. I'm not going to micromanage your folks for you, okay? But we can make sure that we estimate the hours properly, okay? And we hold the team lead responsible for getting the right 2 people there. Because a lot of things happen. People go on vacations, they get sick, they're not available. So it's got to be up to the team lead. I don't want to micromanage underneath that person because it does 2 things. It makes them less responsible and accountable, and besides, they do a better job of managing the folks than I would.
I agree, having the hours accountable.
Yes, sir.
accounted for is very important.
We definitely will have the hours accounted for.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
That's something Councilman Schwan raised a couple months ago, and I think we're getting
that's how we're
close. We're getting
managing
closer.
Right, so that's what this organization is all about, is to make sure we got the right people in place. All right, so there's 4 levels, I'm sorry.
Yeah,
We
if I
have
may,
a
Chair.
question, Councilwoman Baker.
Thank you.
Oh, yes, ma'am.
On the organizational chart, again, we have 3 people leading the team. And you, on the other slide that we were given earlier, are responsible for fiscal. So if we had a question on this, shouldn't you be at the top with Dennis Kennedy and Angie Rich below you? Are you the guy that if there's a problem, do we go to Dennis Kennedy, do we go to Angie, or do we go to you?
Well,
Would you then be at the top of that organizational chart as the project manager?
Yes, ma'am. So from a project management point of view, I would be the project manager. Ultimately, I'm a contractor, okay? I'm responsible to Dennis Kennedy for the entire financial area, so he makes the final call. I'll certainly make recommendations and stand here and tell you what those are, okay? So technically, Dennis Kennedy should be at the top of that chart.
Whoever is responsible for us to be the go-to should be at the top and not split by 3.
Okay.
I would ask that Dennis Kennedy
ma'am.
then, if that is the decision, that he is at the top of the organizational chart.
Yes, ma'am. We can certainly reflect the chart that way. That's the reality.
Thank you.
Okay. Other questions?
Anything else? Okay, please proceed.
Okay. So the next section here is schedule and planning management best practices here. One of the things that I looked at, just guidelines based on experience, not only mine, but many others in the ERP arena. A couple of things were really important that immediately jumped out to me after I'd been here just a week or 2. First one of those is that if you look at a go-live date on a calendar, we really need to have, and back up about a month and a half, 45 days from that go-live date, you need to have the solution in a box. By that I mean the development's done, testing's done, training materials are done, we're ready to finish final training at that point, basically everything packaged, if you will, and ready to lock and load for go-live about 45 days in advance. If you're not, then you're moving into a risk area that you have to very closely evaluate what you're doing, okay? And that was not true of the schedules that I saw when I came in the door. So that was one of the first things that caused me to back up and take a look at what was actually doable to what we needed to do to reduce that risk. Okay. The second piece of that is making sure that we allow adequate time to freeze the business and the business transactions at least. Well, normally it's about 2 weeks in advance of go live. So you basically lock everything down. And you begin your conversion process, which to do a full conversion process, bring all the legacy data over, load it, validate it, get it into the new system, validate it in the new system, and run some trials in the new system to make sure that everything is properly there, not only with your legacy data, but also any customization that was done that has to be tested there. You need to be able to validate all of that in that new system, and that all happens within that last 2 weeks before go live. And I think an important aspect of this, it's not nuanced here, it's pretty critical, is that and we'll look at a plan example in a second, I think there's 2 aspects to the plan that are important. Infor has a delivery plan. They have deliverables based on their contract. The county has a deployment plan that relies on those deliverables, and those have to be linked together. Obviously, one depends on the other. The county can't implement without Infor's deliverables. But I think it's clear that we identify our objectives in our portion of the plan, and Infor needs to align with that. And I think rather than driven off of just their deliverable plan. So that's a difference in how the plans are constructed now versus where we were, I don't know, a month and a half ago or something. Okay? That makes sense.
Okay, please proceed.
Yes,
We
sir.
have just a few more minutes. Hopefully, we can get through the next 2 slides, which is your section, and then
I'll
we'll have
accelerate
to.
rather than deviate. Okay. Okay. So real quickly here, an example of what is, when I say testing cycle, I use that term. What do I mean by that? Okay. What that means is that we, before, for each cycle, that we go through, so-called testing cycle. We first make sure we're aligned with our systems integrator Infor on what's going to be in that cycle, that we're all agreeing. What's the schedule for the cycle? Are the deliverables, those blue lines represent checkpoints that go back to Infor's plan to say is all, and they're literally wired into the plan that way so that if they delay it, it shows on our plan. Those blue lines say, is Infor got all the pieces it takes to do those things? In this case, those things are the technical pieces, the functional pieces, and are they ready to actually start executing the test? Is the environment and everything ready? So then we actually execute the test. Following that, we need to make sure we allow time for so-called break fix or defect correction. So we're going. I've never seen a test run perfectly, no matter where we are in the testing cycle. So we've got to allow the SI, the systems integrator, time to go fix whatever problems we find and allow us to retest that. The minimum period here is at least 2 weeks to do that. So, all right. And then associated with that, there's some things that we should be communicating through change management, and there's some things that ought to be happening in terms of training that go parallel in those things. So you see those two lines at the bottom. They actually run the full length of the cycle. There's different things that we need to do there. There's parts of those plans. Questions?
Go on.
Okay. Last slide. So let me do this. There we go. Okay, so what this slide represents what I depicted earlier, which is this is the financial deployment plan. This is an example of a piece of the plan here. This is the plan that actually ends up on 4.1, but it's pretty representative here of multiple test cycles. We went from 2 test cycles to a minimum of 3, which I thought was necessary. We also ran what I'm calling cycle 0 here. We ran just a sort of trial, what I called process validation cycle, just with procurement, so we could get a sense for, we did that pretty shortly after I got here, get a sense for how things were working with Infor, how they were setting up tests, how they were setting up scripts, so to prove to ourselves on a micro level what we needed to learn and correct to go execute the no-kidding cycles 1, 2, 3 that we needed to do. So we learned a lot out of that. We made some adjustments, and we are now going to be preparing to go through these other cycles. So this represents that. The second and last piece of information that's important out of here is that in terms of go-live decision-making, somebody had mentioned the go-live decision-making process here. We have a go-live checklist that's fairly extensive that's a check the box before we actually go into production on across the board on these systems. And it's a pretty exhaustive list. Pretty exhaustive being defined as, I don't know, there's probably 80 to 100 items on there that we're checking off to make sure that all the right stuff's in place. And that go-live recommendation is made from the team. First of all, these team leads that I mentioned here, they'll make their portion of the recommendation. We'll consolidate that as a recommendation from the project team, and that'll go to the PMO, and ultimately we'll make the decision. We'll go through that governance process to make the decision to go live. So it'll be a formal process with a formal checkoff list. And that's my story, and I'm sticking to it. So anyway, that's all that I have. Any
Okay, well, we thank you for your presentation, and we thank you for all the work that we're doing. We've run out of time for today. We have 2 remaining sections related to project financials and to return on investment, and what I'm hoping to do is that on Thursday we have the meeting where we're going to hear from our consultant Zig, and I would just like to add those 2 modules to our agenda for that day. We'll adjust the agenda a little bit. Those presentations are going to need to be brief because besides ERP, we also have a second committee of the whole at 1:30 on that one day, and we don't want to run people completely ragged. Does that work for you?
I believe that'll work. Will that work for, can you do it on? Okay, you can do it, and I'm out on Thursday, but Mr. Hay can be here on Thursday.
Okay,
To
fine.
do that presentation, and I just wanted to make one other point. I don't want to leave the impression, from anything I said, that the original concept of going to an accrual system was something that was strange and unusual in government. I understand that many states and local communities and school boards have moved to the accrual system. So that wasn't a wildly out of bounds decision from that perspective in terms of where things are heading in the future. Now, to me, given my age and experience, the idea of having to work with an accrual system is really very confounding and difficult. And so I'm personally happy the county decided to go to a cash system. And I know Dennis Kennedy was as well, but I don't want to leave the impression that the accrual system is not often used in government and that there aren't many governments moving to that system today. Just to clarify that particular issue.
Okay, there being nothing further to hold our attention and another committee ready to go, we stand adjourned. Thanks very much, everybody.